All
Yeah.
right. So we are at our next session and we are going to be talking about regional organizing issues, and it's going to be facilitated by Richard Green and Mark Dorley. So welcome back, and I'll hand it over to you, gentlemen.
All right. So I'm Mark Dorley, and I've been my expertise, quote unquote, on this comes from organizing a high school regional bowl for the last 13 years. And I've been part of the organizing committee for the national IEB for the last several years. So and I'm just going to share some thoughts around the challenges of organizing our competition, and then turn it over to Richard, and he's going to comment about his own experience. But he has that spreadsheet he wants to show all of you, which is a work of genius as far as I'm concerned. So I would say the biggest challenge has to do with recruiting judges and training judges, and ensuring that judges are as high quality as possible. And just so I wanted to share with you a few strategies that I have. So I'm at a university, so the first thing that I've begun to do recently is reach out to new faculty. So there's always new faculty coming on every semester or every academic year. So I send them a welcome note, tell them some of the stuff I'm involved in, including the High School Ethics Bowl. I also tell them about the Intercollegiate Ethics Bowl, and just so that they could share with their students. They'll have that information to share with students as they go along. But I'm more interested in inviting them into being a judge. The other thing that I do is I've been doing it for a while, so of course I keep the list of all past judges, even those who haven't judged for me for a while. I constantly reach out to them, and through that I've built that list because they've told colleagues about. So if I have physicians or lawyers or public school teachers, they tell their colleagues about this, and that gets me more judges. And so when COVID hit, nothing really stopped because we just went online. So I never really lost judges. Now there might be judges who decided they didn't want to judge online, but I had such a large list that it didn't really affect um, uh, the availability of judges for me. So, but I have to stay on top of that, especially with faculty, new faculty, and reaching out to them and inviting them in. Sometimes they'll come, they'll try it, but my competition's on a Saturday, and they have to be there at 7:30 in the morning on Saturday. So they'll do it once, and then they realize it's not. So anyway, so I have turnover because it's such an early start, but I've never had an issue with getting judges. And another strategy for me is to, even though my regional is not until January, it's the first Saturday in February, I contact them in August, let them know this date is coming. I contact them again in October, this is the date. So constantly reminding them, make sure it's on their calendar. I have some judges who mark their calendar every year when they're at the competition, because I know the date for next year. So I have a significant number of returners. The other thing that's key is training. And I used to do training for the first several years. I used to do training exclusively at the bowl. So I encourage them to get there even earlier. Well, 7:30 is the start time is 9 o'clock, but they get there at 7:30. I give them breakfast and we do some training. I send them training materials ahead of time. But then I realized one of the gifts of COVID is that I could do training virtually. And so the last several years, what I've done is the week before the competition, I have 2 times in the evening for judges to get on Zoom with me, and I do the training there, and that seems to have been incredibly helpful to the judges. They're awake, first of all, and paying attention, as they might not have been at 7:30 in the morning on the competition day. And I also try to always have experienced judges on each Zoom call, because I always turn to them to have them offer their experience, and the new judges really find that valuable. So anyway, that to me is the biggest challenge with organizing these things, is to get judges, and those are a couple of strategies. I'm sure there are other strategies that people on here have used. I've been blessed to not have to spend a lot of time creating all kinds of relationships outside of traditional academic settings, because I've been able to get the judges. So it hasn't been an issue for me to have to go, because I can imagine you could go to different organizations within your community to mine those places for judges. I'm sure there's some experience here that can speak to that. The other biggest thing for me is communication with the coaches, because there's so much turnover. So I have a couple teams that have had the same coach for 13 years, but others have different coaches every other year. And emails are tied to the individual coaches. So as opposed to like a school having a Gmail account just for their ethics bowl team, which it just occurred to me that I might make that suggestion to them. But so sometimes there's communication lost, and so coming up with ways to make sure there's continuity of communication is really important. And then the last thing I want to say, I had this experience one time. I really got excited about social media and the Ethics Bowl. And so several years ago, this before COVID, several years ago, I decided to live tweet during the competition, because once the competition starts, I, as the organizer, can relax, because everybody's where they're supposed to be. The moderators, if I get through the first round, I know I have nothing to worry about, because everybody's kind of goes in remote control in some ways. So that I figured, well, I'm free, so I'll just go around and I'll live tweet. Well, didn't work out so well, because I was live tweeting what teams were saying and identifying the team. And I got smacked down almost immediately by the coaches, because they didn't want they said Ethics Bowl is a place where students are experimenting with ideas, and so they ought not to be tagged with those ideas in a social media environment. So just at least the way I was doing it didn't work. I'm sure there's a less harmful way to do it. I just decided, you know what, I'm not gonna. It's not that valuable to me, so I stopped doing that. But just as a word of caution, if you want to do something like that, or encourage people to do that, and I'm sure people on this call are much more savvy than I am with the social media. Anyway, those just some initial thoughts, and we're really hoping that you have questions for us and issues that you'd like to get some feedback on. Richard and I are excited to have that conversation. But those are my general thoughts. Richard?
Yeah, so the big thing I think that I need to say here is what Mark said. The number one issue every time I've run a lot of bowls. I started the Wasatch Regional with Karen Mizell back in 2001, and we've been doing it the whole time. And then I've run the National Bowl several times, helped with a lot of other regions running their bowls when I was the chair of the IEB. We put some in overseas. I mean, I probably done 150 of these, and every time judging is the number one issue. Getting good qualified judges, getting them trained, getting them to show up when they're supposed to, and so forth. And all of Mark's suggestions are good. And then the second thing I would talk about is what Mark said about communication with coaches. That's extremely important, and I'm going to go in just a slightly different direction with it. Some of the things that I've seen go wrong, from my vantage point as IEB chair, would be in regions where the organizers haven't communicated everything going on to the coaches. So just to use one example, the regions get to decide for themselves how they want to format their bowl. Our region uses a round robin, and so we just rank the teams at the end, just like occurs at the national competition before the elimination rounds. Other regions might have 2 or 3 qualifying rounds of semifinals and a final and so forth. One region changed the way they did things during the regional season, or even made the decision at the start of it. So they went from a semifinal final situation to a round robin. And as a smaller region, they only had one bid to offer to the national competition. So they got to the fourth round, and the team that was in second place was very far ahead of the team that was in third. And so the coach sort of gleefully said to the organizer, "Oh, this is great. So we're going to be in the finals, and you know, I like our chances of going to nationals." And the organizer said, "Oh, no, 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 we changed it this year. It's a round robin, just whoever's ranked first. And the last round is not the finals. The last round is just who you're scheduled to go against in the fifth round." Um, about half the coaches in that region were appalled. It's like, well, wait a minute, we didn't know about this. And the coach said, "Well, I sent out an email with the format and rules, and it was sort of buried in there." So they'd received a document just a few days in advance stating the change, but none of them had managed to be aware of it. So I think, as an organizer, you want to just make it explicit, send emails saying, "Here are some changes for this year if you've made changes," and so forth. And let people know exactly how the competition's going to go. It's not just a matter of getting them to the right room at the right time. And by the way, I should say a thing about that. I had an experience several years ago where, with our region, we move around the region. So the competition was at Weber State. The following year, it was at Utah Valley University. A team that participated for the first time at Weber State somehow missed the part of the memo saying we were at Utah Valley the next year because it was buried in there and I didn't make it explicit. They drove to the wrong school and we had to wait about 75 minutes to start the competition, right? So good communication between organizers and coaches is absolutely essential. The other thing that strikes me as a sort of a great difficulty of organizing competitions is something that we can actually help with. So Mark mentioned my spreadsheet, and I just want to sort of briefly share this. Let me make sure I have the right document up. There we go. And yeah, so here's the spreadsheet. And just to give you a little background, this is something that we at the Ethics Bowl are happy to make available a version of this to anyone having any kind of ethics bowl, whether it be high school or, if you're doing ethics bowl in your class and you want to use these sort of things. And it makes the scorekeeping and the scheduling fairly easy. I've got about 160, maybe 150 templates, right? Just over the years, I've made a lot of these, and there's a lot of variations. So this one is for a 10-team, 4-round competition that uses IEB scoring rules. You might have an 8-team competition or a 24-team competition or a 17-team competition. You might have 3 rounds. You might have 5 rounds, right? If you do a round robin like us, you might not be using IEB rules. So, in the Intercollegiate Ethics Bowl, the winner of the match is determined by the number of judges giving the win. But we used to use total points, right? And you might, in your competition, be using total points. We have or can produce those variations very easily. Some do number of wins as a first tiebreaker, and as a second tiebreaker, number of judges giving wins rather than point differential. We have those variations as well. So like I said, we can accommodate you. And these are fairly simple. You'll notice down here, it says team 1. I'm just going to put in some names. So all you need to enter, and I would use a random process to determine these so you get a random schedule. And I can do that for you as well. So we have Utah State. Weber State. Villanova. I'm not going to put in the rest. And then you'll see that that's sort of populated up here. So that will produce this schedule, right? Round 1, first match is Utah State versus Weber State. In room 1, in room 2, it's Villanova versus team 4, etc. In round 2, Villanova is in room 1 against team 7, and Utah State is in room 3 versus team 10. You can even put in the room numbers. So Smith Hall, 101. That's for Adam Smith, if anyone's wondering at home. Jones Hall, oddly, for Grace Jones, the singer. All right. So, and then that will change these over here, right? So it's going to say Smith Hall, Jones Hall, room 3, room 4, and so forth. So that's the setup. You just need to enter the rooms and enter the teams, and a schedule will be produced where the teams don't hit other judges again. They don't hit the same teams over and over. If you have a large number of rounds, you might have to reshuffle the judges after lunch. We'll let you know, or after round 3, we'll let you know if that happens. The schedule gets produced, and then you'll notice up here we have judge 1, 2, 3. For each match, you just have to enter the scores. So Rachel's team, which is pretty good, is at Utah State. So the first judge gave them a perfect score. The second judge dinged them a point. The third judge dinged them 1 point. They went against my team. No offense if any of my students are here, but they scored in the low 40s every time. And so then this shows that Utah State has won this match. Weber State has lost. Here's the total points. Here's the point differential. Villanova against team 4. I'm just going to put some scores in here. They're clobbering team 4 here, and so forth. And that shows Villanova won that match. So you've just entered the scores. Now you can go to this ranking, and the teams are ranked in real time, right? So this goes on throughout the day. After the first round of matches, Utah State is in first place. They have 1 win, 1 loss. The matches that they haven't competed in are showing as ties, but they have a point differential, which is the first tiebreaker in the Ethics Bowl, of 54. Villanova has 1 win, no losses, but their point differential was only 28. So they're in second place. At the end of the day, you just look at this, and if you've got 4 bids, I think I am messing this up. So let me go back. I should not have clicked on that cell. Okay. There we go. If you have 4 bids, then, USU, Villanova, team 5 and team 6 would earn bids to nationals. And it will tell you over here if there are ties, and if there are, you can go to subsequent tiebreakers. So this makes scheduling and recording the scores during the match very easy. There's a more complicated version of this where we can also have score sheets for each moderator, where they enter the scores from individual judges and it transfers to this sheet. We create a Google sheet version of this. And then the organizers don't have to enter anything in manually, which is nice. But again, it's for a 4-round 10-team competition, it's a little bit of overkill. So if you're organizing a bowl, then you are welcome to use one of these. Just send me an email and say, hey, I need a spreadsheet, and give me the following information. Here are the teams participating, and here are the number of rounds, and we are using IAEB rules, or we're using IAEB rules, but with the following variations. And we'd be happy to send that to you. We can also, we have spreadsheets for competitions with an odd number of teams, right? So if you're using the option, suppose you only have 9 teams show up, where you have a bye round to make it the case that, everybody competes in the same number of matches. We have spreadsheets for that as well. Okay, there was one comment in the chat that I said I'd talk about earlier. let's see. This is Venus says, how many teams do you have and how many judges do you use on average? The regions just vary so much. So I think the fewest number of teams that I've seen, or I should say fewest number of schools, because sometimes they'll send more than one team, is 4. The greatest number at a regional competition, I think, is 32 or 3. And at the national competition, we have 36 teams currently. We've had as many as 40. It's changed at various points over the year. So to figure out the number of judges you need, in each room you need 3 judges and a moderator. So you basically need 4 people. If you've got 20 teams, then you'll have 10 matches going on. So for those 10 matches, you'll need 40 people, right? 3 of which are judges, 1 of which is a moderator. You can have those be different groups, or you can shuffle throughout the day, have people judge for some rounds and moderate for others. And this just sort of highlights what Mark was talking about. Mark's high school bowl gets fairly large. That's a lot of judges and moderators to line up and get trained and so forth. Okay, so Venus says, I meant how many rounds do you have judges, moderators work? Okay, also a good question. There are 3 rounds in some competitions. I think that's sort of the minimum where they all participate. And then there might be a quarter final, or sorry, a semifinal and a final, where you just need 2 rooms full of judges and moderators, and then 1 room for that, 1 group, 4 people for that final. The most that you typically see at regional competitions is maybe 6, 4 rounds. I guess I should say occasionally 7, right? 4 rounds, quarters, semis, and finals. That's sort of an anomaly. 5 or 6 is more the norm. And there's a couple of regions that I really like that they exercise self-care, and they just do 3 rounds, no semis, no quarters, no finals, 3 rounds, and everybody goes home. And there's something from an organizer's perspective that's very nice about that. So it just varies a lot. Okay, and it looks like we've got a lot of other stuff in the chat. So I'm gonna throw it back to Mark to sort of moderate what we talk about from here. Yeah, thanks for listening.
So I just want to jump in here. Thanks, Richard. But the last 2 comments that Venus had there. What I do, my bowl is 3 preliminary rounds and then quarters, semis, and finals. So, and I try to get the first 3 rounds are done about 12:30. So it just the bulk of my judges I'm asking only for the morning, but I need 12 for quarters, and 6 for semis and 3 for finals. So I have some pretty diehard judges who love this, and so they'll stick around for the entire day. My best practice for me, as far as I'm concerned, is that judges in the elimination rounds should have judged in the morning. So I've never had a situation. I don't like, and I've never had the situation where I had to bring in a judge only to start judging at the quarterfinals. I think the students feel more confident about the quality of the judges if they've been there for the whole day. Now, those are big asks, and it depends on your faculty. It depends, your Venus has mentioned faculty in particular. Yeah, it's a big ask for a faculty. Now, I've used a lot of philosophy grad students who really enjoy this and seem to have, at least they haven't grumbled about a whole Saturday being lost. But and I noticed that you pay your grad students, so that's an even bigger benefit if you can give them a little something to spend on their day. But I haven't had to do that. My grad students have been excited about doing it. But every place is different. Every culture is different. So that's a challenge. I mean, and if I had to switch them out, well, then I would do that. I just haven't had to. That hasn't been an issue for me. Okay, let me Well, that's true. Again, that hasn't been my issue. The students have generally been really happy with the judges in my, but I can certainly see that being a problem. Potentially. That was Tess's comment. Yeah, that's, I'm reading it and realizing I didn't say out loud what I was responding to. Sorry about that.
I think it just goes and adds to your point about, you know, having a good roster of judges, and some of us do love to go from all the preliminary rounds all the way to semis and quarters, but sometimes having a vast variety of judges also helps students feel like they're getting judged by more than one person, or having some different set of questions that they could expect from a new judge versus somebody's already judged them. Which I know is a lot to ask for organizers, and having a plethora of judges just handy nearby.
Well, but on the other hand, if you asked a judge, can you come in and work for the afternoon? They're probably more likely to do that than. So I mean, you could get more people. You can get a wider variety of people and more people if they only had to work part of the day.
Yeah, Greg's got a good comment here. I think the more qualified judges you can get, the better. Sometimes judges will commit but need to drop out later. You'll want to have backup judges. I haven't had a competition yet where there weren't judges that canceled the morning of. And so I try to have a few more than I need. Sometimes that's just impossible to get. And so one thing I do as a backup plan is I press the coaches into service, right? I don't ever have them judge the team that they coach, and it's kind of a last resort. But, you know, it's great knowing they're there where we say, gosh, we've only got 2 in this room. Can you do it for a round or 2 until we can get somebody else in there?
Yeah. Venus is asking about my pitch to grad students. Well, the very first time I pitched it, I had some grad students teaching in my program, so they knew me, so they trusted me when I told them they would enjoy it. So then they came and then they told their fellow grads. Then I've never had a problem after that. So, so I guess relationships is the bottom line if they know you and know your work. So that's another, you know, cultivating relationships is a really important part of recruiting judges. And then my event is a 1-day event, but I know some places do 2-day events. That would be a real, just knowing this is on a high school level. The high school students barely can get the day for the competition given everything else that they do. So to do a 2-day thing would not work for me, but I understand that some other people are doing 2 days. So every place is different. You know, you work with the group that you got, and there's a culture. And if you start doing a 2-day and that becomes what they expect. So it's not a problem. They'll adjust. But I did have as Richard was talking earlier, I did have this experience, which was, I had a team. So the way my regional works, I can only handle 16 teams. So my preference is to have 16 high schools. I have yet to have 16 high schools. I end up with maybe 13, 14 high schools. So and then I have 2 spots. So 2 or 3 spots. So I put an email out to all the judges so they register their school, so they're guaranteed 1 spot. Then I put out an email and say, look, I've got 2 spots left. What schools want to bring a second team? And then then if I give them a deadline. If 5 schools want to bring a second team, and I only have 2 spots, then I do a random, I just select out of a hat, 2 teams, and then those 2 teams get to come. Well, one year, this would be prior to my coming up with a process for that, it was just word of mouth. You got to let me know you want to bring a second team. Well, so what happened was one team thought they could bring a second team, but I didn't know they were bringing a second team. So they showed up at the day of the competition with a second team. Now I have an uneven number of teams. And I really don't like the buy. I don't like dealing with it's just too stressful. The whole thing's stressful to begin with. It's just more stress if there's a uneven number. So then I went to a team that had a lot of team members, even though they had one team, and they agreed to split up and be an 18th team in this case. Now I need to find 3 judges. So I served as the moderator, and I have a colleague of mine who helps me run behind the scenes. So he was a judge. I pulled my administrative assistant who had never judged before. She was a judge, and I can't remember. But the point, everything turned out all right. That's so important. Why the communication is critical around those things. It worked out, pulling people in. I love that somebody said they pulled somebody from the cafeteria staff. I mean. And you know what? I think sometimes those people are actually better judges because they're not professor types who are sometimes fall into the I'm the teacher now mode, and which isn't exactly what we want in the ethics bowl. Anyway.
Although Greg's worry was that they weren't trained, right? So
well, right, but
they make
right.
great judges if you can train them.
Exactly. But things worked out in that context.
Yeah.
All right, well, so the floor's open. If anybody wants to, maybe your own experiences you've had, or if there's particular questions you have, we've had some already in the text, in the chat. I hope we got to them. Yeah, going from 8 teams to 21, Venus, that would be a nightmare. So I appreciate the challenges there.
Yeah. Well, while we're waiting for more questions to emerge, I'll just say one thing about having an odd number of teams. Mark mentioned it is terribly inconvenient, and it can extend the day, and you have to find people to stick around to do it. But there's a couple things you can do. One, you don't have to have the buy round like we do. Pat Crossgray and I put together a document years ago outlining a number of different strategies that you could employ, and I'll be happy to make that available to anyone who wants it. What we do in our region is, and this is the virtue of having a round robin rather than quarters and finals and that sort of thing, is we have 5 rounds, right? So we get 15 cases, we cut them down to 12. So we've got 5 rounds of competition. We use 10 cases, we've got 2 backups. It's perfect. In the event that there's an odd number of teams and it's unavoidable, because like Mark, we usually have schools willing to send an extra team, but sometimes it's unavoidable. We just go to 4 rounds. We switch from a 5-round schedule to a 4-round schedule, and round 5 is the buy makeup round. It doesn't extend the day. It doesn't require that we keep judges longer than we ask them to be there. And in fact, most of the rooms of judges can go home early because we just need 2 rooms for that last round typically. So there's options for dealing with that. As an organizer, you want to be prepared, right? It can happen, and it can happen the morning of the competition. Someone just says, my students aren't coming, or my whole team is sick, or we got snowed in. These things all happen with some regularity.
Experiences, questions, worries?
All right, while we're waiting, I've got another one. This is a thing that happens when you have the same judges over time, and the same coaches coming to the competition. Invariably, coaches come to believe that certain judges are problematic, and they will ask you, please don't put my team in the room with this judge or that judge because they're biased against us. And there's lots of ways to deal with that, but you'll want to have some strategy in mind, right? So one thing you can do is just sort of accommodate it, right? If your region's large enough, teams that see certain judges over and over don't have to see those judges again. If you're a smaller region like ours, it becomes difficult to manage, especially if there are 2 or 3 of those things, complaints registered. One way to go is to say, we roughly randomly assign judges And maybe I'll say a little bit about how I match judges, and that's just the breaks. Another thing you could do is talk to the judge, although I don't think the teams would want you doing that because they think that'll just make it worse, right? And say someone's complained about you, and judges are volunteers and deserve to be treated with respect. But be prepared for that as an organizer, and have a plan for how to deal with it. As far as pairing judges goes, what I try to do, as far as it's feasible, and it's not always, is I don't want to fill up the room with philosophers. I think Ethics Bowl is at its best when there's people from a variety of backgrounds serving as judges. So I try to do one and only one philosopher per room. This is again the first pass. The numbers never work out this way. And similarly, I like to have one and only one brand new judge per room, if possible. And then I fill in the middle slot with whoever's left. And then, some rooms might have to have two new people or two philosophers. I also try to get a gender balance, if possible, and as much diversity in each room as possible. And those I said them last, but they're not secondary considerations. So Greg has a question or comment.
Yeah. So this came up in the last session about politicians participating in the Ethics Slam. Any thoughts on politicians participating as judges?
Yeah, I haven't had a situation where I've had that happen, but my thought would be the same. Is I think politicians can't afford in these public situations to say anything that goes against whatever their particular party line is. And in the slam, they weren't even willing to say to the other side, I hear where you're coming from. Let's have a real conversation about it. So I worry about a politician that's pro-life or pro-choice getting an Ethics Bowl case that talks about Roe v. Wade or some such, and hoping that they could be the sort of unbiased, I'm just going to really look at the score sheet and score them how I see them, and award the team that did the best the win. My guess is that it would be more important to ask questions that reinforce their view and all of that. And I get it. It's their job, right? They're not in a position where they can say, or they want somebody out there saying, oh, I saw Judge Smith, and even though they're, affiliated politically this way, they said all these nice things about a competing view. I don't trust them. Let me go on record. I do not trust politicians as far as I can throw them in any context ever. Don't let them pet your dog. Don't buy a sandwich from them. If they've got a little cart on the side of the street, it's probably poisoned. Politicians bad. And if I'm judging an Ethics Bowl and it's a case about politicians, remove me because I'm biased. Great question, Greg.
I just want to highlight, Venus wondered if anyone's had a situation where weather forced the cancellation of in-person and you had to move to virtual. Has anybody had that experience on the call?
So I haven't had that experience, but a number of years ago at the high school regional in Northern California, UC Santa Cruz, that's exactly what happened. So we had a huge storm that came in. It's really dangerous to drive on the only road to get into Santa Cruz. And then the building started leaking. And so Kyle Roberson, within like 2 days or a day and a half, was able to turn the whole thing online. And so, yeah, that has happened. And it was actually a pretty easy transition because at that point in time, we were just coming out of COVID. So people were really already used to, the Zoom model and doing it online. And yeah, and I was really impressed by that. And, and I think there's probably like, 30 teams, high school teams coming to participate in that. So it was a pretty large event and he was able to pull it off. But one of the differences though, that he had an advantage of was that the High School Ethics Bowl has a platform already that's designed for the online version of this. Whereas we don't really have that at the collegiate level. So at the collegiate level, I'm sure it'd probably be a little bit harder. But yeah, it did happen and it was weather related.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about this conversation about teams thinking that a judge might be biased or whatever, and how to handle that. I had a situation last year where a high school team wrote me after the fact that one of the judges that they had, excuse me, was very aggressive to them and clearly didn't like their use of a utilitarian analysis on a case, and was borderline disrespectful. The team members, and in this case, well, anyway, so they came to me, and the coach challenged me about having, and this fellow was the judge in concern was their second or third year judging, so they weren't new. So I felt like, and there was some gender issues involved, and certainly some cultural issues involved. So it was really part of me thought, well, I don't want to give this too much oxygen, but then I thought, well, that's the coward in me not wanting to have this difficult conversation. So what I did was I did some research. Obviously I knew who they were talking about, so I knew who the other judges were, and I just wanted so I contacted the other judges and asked them about the quality of the conversation, and neither of them could corroborate the experience that the team reported. So then my next step was to have a conversation with the judge, and that was a really difficult conversation. Now, part of me thinks, in retrospect, I shouldn't have, given what the other judges told me, I shouldn't have had it. But out of a sense of fairness, I just wanted to have the conversation with him, and it ended up in being a cultural thing. It ended up being, at least as far as I could judge, a difference in expression and the way in which ideas are expressed and mannerisms. And so it just highlighted to me a challenge the Ethics Bowl has in general, in the sense of, at least from my experience, is it's a predominantly white organization. And so you have when different voices come into that space, it gets heard differently, whether by judges or by the team members, and can be the source of some confusion and frustration and hurt feelings. So, but I think the organizer has a response. So the reason I mean, it just seems to me I had an obligation to do something about what I was told, at least to have conversations. I made no accusations. I was just reporting, and asking for clarification. But it was a really difficult conversation with this particular judge. But it ended well. But anyway, that's going to come. That's the only time that's happened in my experience. But I can't imagine it's unique, but an important kind of conversation that we have to have.
All right, we're coming up at 12. All right, so we are coming up to the end of this session, so we're going to take a 15-minute break. And so our last session of the day is really going to be 4 different breakout topic rooms if you are interested. So we are going to have a breakout room that's going to focus on the High School Ethics Bowl that will be facilitated by Mark and Alex. So if you're interested in that, come back and you can jump into that group. We're going to do another quick breakout session on coaching that's going to be facilitated by John and I. Rachel and Richard are going to do another quick breakout session on the Ethics Bowl inside and outside of the classroom. And then the last one, fundraising, we'll have a section on fundraising for your teams, and that's going to be facilitated by Deborah and Tasneem. So we'll take a 15-minute break, and hopefully we'll see you all.
Michael, one sec.
Yeah.
Greg and Victor, if it's not too crowded in the coaching session, I'll break off from Michael and we can have a small meeting with the 2-year folks. I think there might be 1 or 2 other 2-year people in here too. So we'll just sort of see what the size of the coaching session looks like. And then we can maybe break out if that makes sense. Sorry, thanks.